Recommend this bill to the House.
I call Denise Roche.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the people who are here today in the gallery and the people who are watching at home, the people of Rangitāne, Wairarapa Tāmaki nui-ā-Rua, and the people of Rangitāne or Wairarapa. Sir, it's a privilege to speak on a treaty settlement bill, and so it's with great pleasure that I rise to speak on the Rangitāne Tūmairā Wairarapa Tāmaki nui-ā-Rua claims settlement bill. Sir, I wasn't part of the Select Committee hearings process that resulted after the first reading, so I didn't get to listen to the submissions that were conducted in the Hawke's Bay. However, I have read through the submissions as they appear on the website and as they were sent in. There were 12 submissions in all, and there were 6 that were heard. Now, the submissions themselves are really interesting, and having read the settlement deed, having read the legislation as well, I'm left with some sympathy and concern for some of those submitters. Other people have talked, including the Minister, that it is not the role of the Crown to determine who makes up the iwi in terms of dealing with the settlements. However, we do have some concern about the fact that hapu are left in or out of settlement deeds. Now, the role of the Select Committee is not to determine that at all, and we acknowledge that. The role of the Select Committee is fairly limited in some ways. We can't go back and negotiate the settlement because it's already being done. However, for the record, I need to state that the Greens do have concerns about treaty settlements, that they may, in fact, continue to breach the Treaty of Waitangi because the Crown determines the large natural groupings to some extent. It decides who they will negotiate with, when they will negotiate, and so there is no balance of power there. So we definitely do have some sympathy for Te Hika o Papa'auma, and also for the hapu of Eheteri Kawimata Rautahi, who is the Y1950 claimants. In every treaty settlement bill, sir, the Greens always want to state and get it on the record that we don't actually believe that these settlements are full and final. And the reason we don't think they are full and final is because even though these claims deal with grievances before 1992, we don't know how the impact that the historical grievances will have on future generations, and that's why we don't think it's final. In no way is this settlement full either when you consider the losses which are outlined in the settlement deed and also in the bill itself. When you look at the losses, it's not a full settlement at all, and I think in order for us to move forward with this bill, we need to acknowledge that. And so that is why it is actually outlined in detail in the agreed historical record in the legislation itself. And we have to acknowledge, sir, that even though it's not a full settlement, in no way that it is actually the best negotiation that could happen up to this point, because it's not to undermine the negotiations that have already occurred and the generations who've actually participated in trying to get these grievances recognised, either on the side of Rangitāne or on the Crown side. So I just want to assure the House that actually it's not to undermine the negotiations that have happened, because this settlement is very hard won. We're also concerned. Well, we also state that it's not full and final. Basically, because we need to recognise the generosity of the people in accepting the settlement, and we are concerned that the generosity that this people are showing will lead to further claims. One of my colleagues on this side of the House has already talked about the issue of cross-claimants, and so I just want to also acknowledge the work that's gone on, particularly with the iwi, to determine the way forward and the pathway forward for this. I also want to recognise that the relationship, the cultural redress and the relationship that this iwi will be having, particularly with councils, these are relationships for the future that are not always easy. So we want to wish them well and how that unfolds as well. So the financial redress is 32.5 million plus interest. And like the previous speaker, we acknowledge that there will be people out there who don't know the history of this, who haven't read the settlement deed or the legislation, and that they will be saying the things that they always say, which is pretty racist, really, that, you know, this is a gravy train, the treaty gravy train, which offends me to my soul, because it's not. And anybody who had a passing look at this legislation would understand that. And yes, I believe that there is a requirement for us to teach the history of the people of this land to a much wider audience so that we can combat that. The 32.5 million there is a drop in the hat. When we compare it to some of the other payments that this government has made, the bailout, Southern Finance, which was 1.2 billion, this is a very small amount. They didn't even lose their land. But anyway, this is about the future. In the third reading, we'll talk more about the future. But for today's reading, the second reading speech, we just needed to acknowledge all that's happened during the Select Committee process. We also want to restate that this is we should be congratulating the iwi on accepting this deal as well, because it is the best you can get. It does put Rangitāne on a more secure economic footing. We acknowledge that. We acknowledge that it's time to celebrate that. And so we will be supporting this to the final part of the reading, which will be the next one.
I call up Pataparani, Tanakwe.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.